Blog Talk Radio.
Good evening. Welcome to The View Up Here. I am your host, Canadian Glenn, and it is January 10th, 2018. Happy New Year, everyone. Belated. Well, it's a new year. That means there are new elections, of course. There are 3 provincial elections scheduled in Canada for 2018. New Brunswick, late September. Quebec, as soon as October hits. But there's one on June 7th that's going to be the biggest show, without a doubt. Ontario goes to the polls June 7th, 2018. Canada's most populous province, biggest economic force. Kathleen Wynne has had anything but a smooth ride, but there's lots of reasons, real ones and not so real. Through all of 2017, polling shows the Liberals are going to lose this year, but are they? Is it so sure? We're gonna mention how short the spring session will likely be. We'll look at the games already in play. And Dave Glover, host of Canada's only holistic political chat. That is an accurate description. Drive time, weekdays, 4 to 7 p.m. Eastern on northumberland897.ca. Dave returns to The View Up Here. We're going to talk about what is the problem with Kathleen Wynne and Ontario voters. Is there a problem? How do you fix the problem? Etc. Well, having a couple weeks off. I timed that out pretty good. Luck, I guess. I'll take it. Now, welcome to the show. Dave Glover. Good evening, Dave.
Hey, Glenn. How are you today?
I'm all right, sir. Winter is back in my part of the world, but that's to be expected. Welcome to the show.
Oh, it's back in my part of the world too, brother. Let me tell you. We've had some crazy snowfall here, just as much as you guys. We've got the warm patch coming through right now, just as you had about a week ago, I understand. But yeah, we're moving through it.
Indeed. Well, what choice have we got? We're Canadian. That's how it goes. Now,
that's right.
The one thing I just wanted to get out of the way right at the start. The Queen's Park is back in business on February 20th. Still quite a ways away. The election is on June 7th. So how long is the spring session? It's over at the end of April?
I'm not even sure, actually.
You know?
I was talking to our MPP, Lou Rinaldi. I talk to him several times a month. And I understand they'll probably bring in a budget, like a throne speech, a brief budget. But really what they're going to be doing for 2018, other than preparing for the election, of course, is just wrapping up any legislation that they just haven't finished yet. So hopefully that'll come to. It's really just this is going to be a government for now that is sort of cleaning off the table, as it were.
Well, that makes sense for sure. No doubt about that.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a certain amount that the campaign the writ has to drop a certain amount of time before June 7th, so I'm thinking that's got to be
That's right.
early May. So,
I think we'll probably have, I'm going to guess, a short election period, probably 45 days. I think that's the minimum in the province.
Wow. Okay,
Again,
so
I'm not positive. I'm not. So
well,
if it's June, we're talking.
If that's the case, that means we're looking at about April 15th, and the legislature will rise.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they'll drop the writ before. Exactly. It's less than 2 months, and it's time that's going to fly by really quickly, I'm sure.
Okay, well,
so I guess one thing I want to say off the top here, I know, and I'm probably going to come across to your listeners as someone who is favorable towards the government. Just to let the listeners know, I mean, I'm not a member of any political party. I haven't been a member of a political party for more than a decade. The last party I belonged to was the New Democratic Party, and I haven't really belonged to a political party since probably 2000. But I tend to swing. I'm a social democrat. I mean, that's the best way I can put it. I mean, I think it's the responsibility of government, if they're going to collect our tax dollars, the best thing that we can expect from them then is to provide services for that money. Everyone likes to talk about how we have free health care in Canada, but nothing's free. We pay for all of it. In some jurisdictions, they have taxes as high as 45%. Here in Ontario, they're not nearly that high. But, I mean, I still expect the government to spend that money in a fashion that's in the best interest of all residents, not to give the tax dollars away to corporations, for instance, or tax subsidies for various groups. I mean, for me, the only role of a government, one thing that people like to say is that government should be managed like a household. But the reality is the government isn't a household. The government is the largest not-for-profit in your provincial jurisdiction. It's the largest not-for-profit in the country. The goal of the government isn't to make money. It's to make life easier for everyone in the country. That's my belief.
Well, I would tend to agree with that. And, if you want to even stick to the so-called right end of the spectrum for value of money, if the job of the government is to, the job of the government truly is to do some minimum standards of life for their citizens, well, if you want value for that, it's going to cost you some money. So they should just get over it.
That's right. That's right. It's not free. It's not free. And I mean, we talk about, in Ontario, I live in a riding right now where the largest growth demographic is seniors, okay, older Canadians. We tend to grow old people out here. And I live in Eastern Ontario. And the one thing I have to say, I had an interview with some representatives of CARP once, about a year ago. And I'll tell you right now, a lot of people say, we got government debt, we got this, we got that. We have just come through possibly the best generation for wealth generation in centuries. I mean, the largest cohort, the baby boomers, right? They received all these wonderful benefits after the Second World War, health care, Social Security, all kinds of other benefits that came from people, their parents, paying taxes. And then we hit this generation that said, well, I want more money in my pocket. That was the mantra of the ultra-right, right? I want more money in my pocket. Consumers know how best to spend that money. So they kept giving this money back to people. And now we're in a situation where those people, the very same people that were demanding more money in their pocket as they were raising their children, are now, they're getting older, they're infirmed, they want supportive housing, they want more health care, they want specialized doctors, they want to have this service and that service. And yet, for the entire time that they were young adults and well into their middle age, they wanted to cut taxes. Well, this is the price of cutting taxes. Lack of service. People talk about wait times. We hear about hallway patients. I read a report from 1981. It's the first mention of hallway patients in 1981. Well, what happened prior to 1981? Prior to 1981, the Bank of Canada stopped financing governments in this country. We are the only country in the world that still owns its central bank, and yet we don't allow it to do the job it was created for, which is to finance governments, to provide that bridge funding, to provide the extra funding they need to do things like build subways and social housing and hospitals and schools and build roads and pay for judges and courthouses and police. So when I look at where we are in terms of debt and deficit, I'm going to blame the CARP generation. I'm going to blame that generation, the people that said they wanted more money in their pockets, the people that demanded that government get out of the way. Well, now those people want government. Now they're all wondering where the government went.
Well, that's true. And one other thing I would add, as you said, this generation that kept singing the song of more of my money in my pocket.
Mm-hmm.
And now they get to their senior period of life. Where's all that money that was in their pocket? Why do they?
Yeah.
Well, what
exactly.
happened?
Well, I liken it. I campaigned a few years ago. I campaigned for municipal government, and I was knocking on people's doors, and I had this woman say to me, "Why should I pay public school taxes? I'm an older resident. I don't have any kids. My children are grown up. Why should I have to pay for public schools?" And I was reminded of something a friend of mine said to me once, which was, well, do you have a doctor? Do you have a lawyer? Do you have someone who's a skilled trades worker? Then, of course, she's like, yeah, well, I've called plumbers. I have a lawyer. I've seen a doctor. I said, well, those people were trained. Their educations, for the most part, were paid for with tax dollars. If you stopped paying your taxes or you decided to divert your taxes to something that you preferred to spend your money on, who's going to pay for the education of those people? I guess that means only the elite can attend those schools then. Only people who come from wealth can attend those schools. So again, we go back to the feudal system that we had. I mean, let's face it, life before social medicine and before the social contract, if you will, was pretty hard for Canadians.
Yeah.
Do we want to go back to that?
Well, exactly. And I mean, if it was bad then with the relatively simple economy that we had compared to now, it'd be much worse now.
Exactly. And on top of that, we still had our central bank being able to provide funding for things like railroads and airports. I mean, we got a federal government right now, and the previous government was doing this too. I mean, they are talking about selling off our airports. A lot of people aren't aware of that. In provincial governments, I mean, look at provincial governments that are talking about selling off their public lands and privatizing public lands. I mean, is that what we want, or do we want to stay? I mean, we can either have what we have now and build on it and fix it, or we can sell it off and there'll be some people who can enjoy the benefit. And for the most part, though, there'll be people out there who don't enjoy those benefits. And I think for Ontario, that's really the big question now, right? I mean, the question is we've got a government now. People are like, oh, the Ontario government, they so much debt. Again, as I was saying to you before the show, a lot of that debt is projected debt. All right, the $300 billion that the Conservatives like to talk about, that's projected debt over the next 10 years. And that's money that's going to go to build more hospitals, more schools, to resurface roads. I mean, the greatest expense the provincial government has had since the McGuinty government was first elected 14 years ago has been to build on infrastructure that had been allowed for nearly 30 years to go to hell in a handcart. I mean, we had hydro infrastructure that was literally falling off the towers. We had towers that were crumbling. We had blackouts several times a year in the province of Ontario. Why? Because we didn't pay that hydro money that was supposed to go into infrastructure went into general revenue. And that money was, look at the general revenue we have. Oh, I guess we can afford to cut taxes. I mean, that's the mentality. I mean, like Alberta, the Conservatives were in power in Ontario for almost 47 years. Many people aren't aware of that.
Yep.
Prior to David Peterson.
Davis was merely the last grand hurrah, right? Or Harris?
Well, yeah. Well, yeah. Harris was, I guess. Well, he came after they had been originally defeated. Don't forget, I mean, it was right up till
that's true.
to Bill Davis. Bill Davis stepped down. I can't remember who the leader was after Bill Davis. Very short. Larry, I can't remember his name now, but he was the premier for a very short period of time. Then David Peterson was elected first with a minority. Then he got a majority government. Then the NDP came in. Then we went back to the Conservatives. But for 47 years, we were under the Conservatives. And I got to say, I grew up in Bill Davis's Ontario, okay? Progressive conservatism. That, in my humble opinion, that's where Kathleen Wynne has taken Ontario. Kathleen Wynne has taken Ontario back to that progressive, conservative, Bill Davis, if you will, model that said, government should only collect taxes that they need, but at the same time, You got to remember, we got to patch that leaky roof. We got to make sure that we can keep the hydro on, that we can keep the heat on. We got to make sure that, if there's problems with the plumbing, that we fix that plumbing, to use the household analogy. Because for generations, we had governments that just said, we can pay for that next year. We can pay for that next year. I mean, you live in Edmonton, Glenn, and I know there were places in Edmonton. I was there in the early 80s, and there were places in Edmonton that, were crumbling around them. But the municipal government and even the provincial government said, we can pay for that in next year. That'll be in next year's budget. I mean, how many times did we watch public infrastructure crumble around our ears because they kept kicking it down the road? This provincial government, this Ontario government currently, is not kicking things down the road. And if they are, they're banking on kicking it down the road. So, I mean, that's called planning. I don't understand how that can be a problem.
Well, that's true. Now, when you mentioned using Ontario Hydro as a backstop to present balanced budgets, that's exactly what Christy Clark and the BC Liberals did with BC Hydro, and we see where that is getting them. So, yeah, that's
same thing happened. I mean, same thing happened in Quebec. With Quebec Hydro for the longest time. I mean, one of the things people don't remember, and I guess I got a really long memory. That's why I tell people to be the elephant in the room, right, Glenn? Don't forget. The thing is this: when Ontario Hydro was started under the Adam Beck model, hydro fees, the cost that people paid for hydro, was calculated as the amount necessary to maintain the service. That's what you paid for. So you weren't really paying a quote unquote market rate for hydro, but what you were paying for was the cost to provide that service. So if they knew in a year down the road they were going to have to restore hydro towers in the north, they had to budget how much was that going to cost. Okay, it's going to cost us this much. How many customers do we have? Okay, then divide that cost by the amount of customers on the forecasted projected earnings, and that's how they came up with the price. Okay, because every cent that was earned by hydro, according to the Adam Beck model, was supposed to go right back into hydro, and that's why they were able to maintain, the generation capacity, the transmission capacity, the service capacity. And then at one point we had a government that said, well, we need to, Ontario Hydro makes a lot of money. That's a lot of money that's sitting in an account. We should take that money and put it into general revenue, which is what they did. And so Ontario Hydro went from being an entity that was generating revenue to cover its costs to an entity that was creating a market product, energy, that was being charged a market rate, a fair market rate, which was different from the model. And so we saw profits being dumped into the government telling Hydro, you got to make do with what you have. Hydro saying, well, wait a second, the original mandate was, don't worry about it. And then they started looking at selling it off, right? And obviously it can't maintain itself. It would be better in private hands. And that's sort of the beginning of privatization, and that's really when that all started. That wasn't this government that did that.
Well, see, the thing that strikes me about that is when it was a true Crown corporation, it was budgeting to break even, nothing more.
That's right.
And in that circumstance, them having a monopoly, I don't find offensive. But then as soon as you
because it was a public monopoly. That's the thing.
But when the government says, we can make this profitable to cover other screw-ups we make, and we're going to keep the monopoly. So then how do you control the profit they make?
Well, and that was the problem. And that's where you started seeing things like the hydro managers getting paid, $1 million a year or whatever. It's not that high, to be honest with you, but, it felt that high. A lot of workers were like, I have friends who work at OPG right now, Ontario Power Generators. And, they used to have things like, some of the benefits they got was like, because he works outside primarily, so on his crew, they were provided with new winter coats every 2 or 3 years, part of the mandate. One of the bonuses they got at the end of every year was, new outerwear, or at least the cost for outerwear paid into your package. Well, they cut those benefits to workers so that they could increase the bottom line bonus structure for management. That was done a few years ago. So, It's gone really from being a public entity. That's what public utility meant. It was a public entity. It was not a for-profit operation. It was to operate, to break even, to provide the public that basic hydro service. And then it became, it was commoditized, to use Maud Barlow's words. It was commoditized. It was turned into something that was a revenue generator. And I mean, look at where we are right now. People are screaming, and there are people who can't afford to pay their hydro because they can't afford to buy food because they can't pay their hydro. And yet,
Yeah.
you know, as my member of provincial parliament said, I mean, he lives on a rural road where there's 7 houses, okay, and they have the same hydro accessibility as everybody else in the province. Now they're on a road with 7 people. That meant that they had to build hydro infrastructure to run the lines there, to maintain those lines for those 7 people. Now, if it was truly market driven, they would be paying astronomical rates, right?
Well,
But they're not,
I think they
because
would all have their own solar.
Well, and yeah, exactly. And who knows? Maybe in the next 5 or 10 years, that's the route they will go. You know, I mean, some of the weird things. You know, let's bring up alternate energy, for instance. In Ontario, unless you build a home that's off the grid, you can't go off the grid, which is insane. Because you have to be able to produce the same amount of energy off the grid as you would have consumed, so you can sell that energy back to hydro. Because again, it comes back to that model, that business model, right? If you have 100 customers, then you can charge $5 each. But if you only have 10 customers, well, then you got to charge, you know, $50 each. Right? That's that business model. I mean, the fewer customers you have, the more money you have to. I mean, if you want to make the same amount of money, right? And so that's kind of what happens with people who are using alternate energy. Now, if you want to build a house from scratch and be off the grid entirely, you can totally do that. But if you were on the grid, to go off the grid, you essentially have to produce twice as much energy, the same amount of energy you would consume that you can sell back to the province, and whatever amount of energy you need for your own lifestyle.
Oh, yeah. They will protect their intrusion into the personal power generation. There's no doubt about it.
Mm-hmm.
But then, you know, considering the way laws have always been in this country, I think that's to be expected, to tell you the truth. But, you know, no matter. But, yeah, this is a common factor of using something that everyone needs, electricity, that is turned into a revenue machine for whatever government is in power. This is another factor that people have to be aware of.
Well, and the other thing, too, is that the revenue that's generated can then be used to offset taxes. All right? So now we're bringing in more money, which means we can reduce taxes. Well, do they reduce taxes across the board? No. As we've seen in conservative governments, they tend to reduce taxes on the wealthier people and on corporations. So, we live in a society in Canada where government subsidized corporations to the tune of billions and billions. I mean, $3 billion a year minimum in the province of Alberta just for the oil and gas sector. I know in the manufacturing sector, about $275 million a year in the automotive sector, for instance. That's how much we subsidize car manufacturing in the province of Ontario. That's $275 million. That's money that could easily be used for something else. But we subsidize jobs. Why? Because if we don't, the car manufacturers will pull up stakes and go else. So really, it's a form of corporate blackmail.
Now, something I was curious about, where do you really put the blame for being blackmailable as governments are now? Was that Ontario's doing, or was that Ottawa's doing?
I think it's a combination, to be honest with you. I think it really has to do with the mercenary style of business capitalism has really gone rogue since the 1970s, since we started doing things like reducing corporate and commercial. I mean, you know, I was listening to an old radio broadcast recently, an old Johnny Dollar episode, and they had some great ads there about patriotism and responsibility and the social contract. And for some reason in the 1970s and 80s, and I blame it on the Powell memo from the United States primarily, but from the 70s and 80s, corporations have been allowed to be separate from the social contract. We have to adhere to it, but they don't have to. And not only do they not have to, they're actually precluded by law from doing so because their only obligation is their shareholders. So there's no social contract there. So they can demand. And really it comes down to governments. Governments have to say, no, sorry, that's not what we're going to do. Oh, well, then we'll leave. No problem. And you won't do business in our country. See, the other thing that people forget is that corporations are granted a charter, a corporate charter, okay? And that's given to them by the provincial or the federal government, depending on what jurisdiction they're operating within. Well, governments have the right to remove that charter. Governments have the obligation to remove that charter if the company isn't acting in the best interest. If they're not willing to comply with the social contract, then the government should say, no problem, you can't be incorporated in this country. We'll take your corporation away. You can still be a corporation. I don't care where you want to be a corporation in Bangladesh or Zimbabwe or even America, that's fine. But in this country, if you don't adhere to the social contract, we're going to take your corporate charter away. Governments have the right to do that, Glenn, and for some reason they don't.
Well, that's absolutely true. But, you know, the current spin on anything like that, anytime you hear about things like that happening, say, for instance, Venezuela, then it's called nationalization, and it's immediately...
Yeah, but I'm not talking about...
But that's, you know, that's the way it's painted, you know, and I think that's why...
Again, well, look at Bernie Sanders in the United States. I mean, Bernie Sanders has been branded a communist, a socialist, and let's face it, Bernie Sanders isn't as far left as our Conservative Party, okay? I mean, for all the quote-unquote socialism of Bernie Sanders, our Conservative Party of Canada is more socially conservative or socially left, if you will, than Bernie Sanders is, all right? There is no socialist party in the United States. The closest they ever came was under FDR. And then successive governments have done what they can to dismantle that. Even Lyndon Johnson was something of a social democrat. Richard Nixon was a social democrat. I mean, Richard Nixon was the last president in the United States, the last actual sitting president, to float the idea of a universal health care. He created the EPA. I mean, he was also responsible for changing the Food and Drug Administration. I mean, Nixon, for all his craziness, did some pretty incredibly socialist things. But, you know, they don't talk about that in America. You know, and to remove a corporate charter is really, it's not only a right, it should be an obligation of governments. You know, but, oh, well, you know, if you take the charter away, then you're anti-business, right? That's what you get called. You don't get called a communist. You know, I'm not talking about nationalizing the company. I'm talking about kicking them out of your country. Apparently you can't do that. Yeah. Now, as far as Kathleen Wynne is concerned, as far as Kathleen Wynne is concerned, I think, to be honest with you, when it comes to what people have against Kathleen Wynne, I'll tell you right now, it's very specific. She's not a very attractive woman, okay? And I don't mean to say that in a sexist way, and I know about the Me Too and all of that other stuff out there, so I don't want to offend anyone with that. But let's face it, she is an openly gay woman. She's not a particularly attractive woman. She's married to another woman. So, I mean, right away, the conservative, if you will, evangelical base is in an uproar, okay? Right there in that. Secondly, she's really doing things that are, some people would consider too much, too fast. I mean, look at the minimum wage thing that's going on in Ontario right now. Everyone's saying the same thing, too much, too fast. Even, you know, small business owners, the Globe and Mail with their headlines, you know, minimum wage, it's going to cost jobs, businesses are going to leave. This has been coming for 2 years, okay? Tim Hortons knew 2 years ago this was going to happen. Eastside Mario's knew 2 years ago this was going to. Every restaurant operator in the province of Ontario, every small business owner, every manufacturer knew this was coming. You know, and another point to make, by the way, is only about 17%, and that's a very conservative number, 17% of Ontarians are currently working for minimum wage. That means everybody else is working for more. So when we're talking about increasing minimum wage, we're talking about creating a livable wage, first of all. That's what we're talking about. So, I mean, do these business owners honestly believe their workers should be paid as little as possible? Do these companies honestly believe that if they didn't have those workers, they would still be in operation? Because they wouldn't, right? You can't continue to pay people, and I hate to use the term, but I'm going to use it. You can't continue to pay people niggardly wages. That's the fact. You can't. Because you're not going to get loyal workers. I mean, when you're working for a minimum wage job, or, I don't know about you, but when I was working for minimum wage jobs, I'll be honest with you, I was phoning it in, man. I was working long enough to get a paycheck so I could pay my rent, and oftentimes I'd quit my job. I'm working there. I bet when my rent's paid this month, no problem. I can find another job tomorrow. But those days are gone. So,
well,
we got,
true.
we have kids now who are in their mid to late 20s, some kids, as I call them kids because I'm in my 50s, who are 30 plus, living in their parents' basements. When the argument about minimum wage comes up, it's like, oh, well, what about these kids? They're just trying to get their first job. That's a misnomer. The people working at Tim Hortons, for the most part, are single moms. They're in their 30s. They're not first-time kids out of school getting their part-time jobs. Sure, maybe on the later night shifts they might be, but the reality is that's not who is working for minimum wage. We're talking about people who are working in high-paying manufacturing jobs, who lost those jobs, who are working on the line at, Kraft or wherever, and now they're working for minimum wage. These are people who are used to making $20, $23 or more an hour with full benefits. Now they're working for minimum wage, which prior to their increase was $11.20, I believe. Again, they're expected to pay their mortgage. They're expected to buy groceries. They're expected to buy clothes for their kids. Who can do that? Nobody. Tell the owners of these businesses to do it. There was one report from a guy who said, well, now my workers are going to make more than me. My answer to that, pay yourself a salary. Give yourself minimum wage. Put yourself on the books. There's a bunch of coffee shops in Ontario. They're paying people more than minimum wage. I know when I ran my coffee shop, we never paid minimum wage. We always paid a couple of dollars above minimum wage, always. There's a guy in Ottawa who's running a restaurant who already pays his people $16 an hour, so the minimum wage increase isn't bothering him. You know what I'm saying? So there were already people out in front of this. It's just sad when you have things like Tim Hortons or the Eastside Marios of the world, or the Sunrise Breakfast restaurants, or a bunch of other restaurants that are saying, well, we're going to cut back. Sorry, we can't afford to do this. Someone was said recently, if you can't afford to increase minimum wage, maybe you can't afford to be in business.
Oh, absolutely. I think that's very valid. But what I wanted to add to that was, I remember when I went to high school, and yes, it was in a different century than the one we're in now, by quite a bit, actually. But I remember when I was in grade 12, I could count the people, that I knew who didn't have a job on my fingers, and that's out of, a high school here. My graduating class was 900. So, everybody had a job. But that's long gone. That's long gone. You go to Hortons or you go to a chain restaurant or retail. It's not kids who have these jobs for the most part anymore. It is adults, middle-aged adults, seniors. Everybody needs the money, and they don't have the responsibilities of a teen. They have the responsibilities of an adult. And that has to be taken into account. These people simply cannot do this job and live for what some of these businesses are paying.
Well, and that's why you have people work 2 and 3 part-time jobs. That's the other issue too. We've allowed corporations to create what they laughingly refer to as the gig economy. One of the other things the Ontario government did when they changed the rules is they forced businesses to create schedules. You can't call somebody at 10 o'clock at night and tell them they got to work at 7 in the morning anymore in Ontario. You can't do that. Being an on-call worker still means they got to give you a schedule 2 weeks in advance. Those are some of the changes that we're talking about here, right? Because let's face it, in the gig economy, I'll be honest. I worked at a few factories when I was a kid, okay? I worked at Roundtree for a while. I worked at one of the other chocolate factories. Did they need to have 25 people on the line all the time? No. Could they have let some of them go and just called them in when they needed them? Yeah, I guess they could have. But then they would have to retrain people. They would have to ensure that people were aware of the workplace safety rules and all that other stuff that comes with working as a team. Well, for some reason, in the latter part of the 90s and the early part of the 2000s, that idea sort of went out the window. And now, most of the temp agencies in my town are working for companies that should and used to have full-time employees, but now they just bring them in when they need them. If they got a big order, they bring them in. So it's like workers are expected to be sitting on a shelf somewhere, waiting to be taken down and used. Well, people aren't tools. We're not hammers. One of the things that Karl Marx used to talk about was the hidden cost of employment. And that's the fact that the guy who works for you or the gal who works for you, when they leave your shop, they have expenses outside of just working for you, right? And in order to be able to work for you, they got to make sure they got a roof over their head, they got food in their belly, they got to make sure they got clothes to wear, and they got to make sure that their other expenses are taken care of, i.e. their children and those related expenses. We're not talking about people who are, working just because they need to fill in the day. People don't work because they're bored, okay? People work generally because they need a freaking job. And that's one of the things that Karl Marx used to talk about that, but for some reason, business that's not a consideration anymore, Glenn. Nobody cares about their workers. If they do, they sure have a really strange way of showing it.
Well, I think, with all the focus on the increase to the minimum wage, that's not the whole story at all, or what the Wynne government has done about labor law at all. And I find it a little strange that it's all about the minimum wage. It's not about a lot of these other things. And I've seen already Andrea Horwath saying that those are all their ideas, the NDP. Is that accurate?
Yeah, sure. That she's saying that? Yeah, I'm sure she's saying that. Is it NDP? All I can say is they don't have the market cornered on progressive ideas. Right? Are those progressive policies? Absolutely. Are they policies the NDP would support? Absolutely. They have. They voted in favor of most of this legislation. So for her to stand around going, these are NDP platitudes. Well, they may be. But if it works, it doesn't matter. Because here's the thing. This goes to the other point I like to make, Glenn, which is the fact that when you're a government, you're a government. You're not the Wynne government or the Liberal government or the Conservative government. You don't have the luxury of wearing a jersey when you're the government. Because the government, in a parliamentary democracy, has to take care of everybody. Right? So the Ontario government is helping New Democrats, they're helping Conservatives, they're helping Liberals, they're helping unaffiliated independents, whatever. They're helping everybody, their citizens. They don't have the luxury of wearing a jersey. Now, when you get into trouble is when you have a government that wears a jersey. We had a government that was wearing a jersey before when they brought in what they call the common sense revolution. Well, who is it common to? That's the question I have. Once governments start to wear jerseys, like our previous federal government did, well, then you have divides. Then you have governments that are looking to create a rift. What I see with the current government in Ontario is a government that's willing to work with the best ideas they can come up with to service the greatest number of people to get the biggest bang for the buck, or as Sheila Fraser would say, value for tax dollars. Have they made errors in some of that spending? Sure they have. Every government does. But what they have done, in my humble opinion, is maximize the benefit of taxation by building more hospitals, by building more schools, by expanding daycare. We're going to be they're bringing in 40,000 daycare spaces. Because don't forget, they can do that now in Ontario. That can be done now because we've got our budget to the place where we need it to be, right? The other thing that the Wynne government hasn't done is raise taxes. Now, they brought in service fees on certain things, but they haven't actually raised taxes. They've, in fact, reduced corporate taxes. Again, and this is the other thing they don't talk about with the small business hue and cry over minimum wage and the Workplace Fairness Act, is they reduced corporate taxes for small businesses by a full percentage. Now, people go, well, that's only 1%. Well, they're only paying 4.5%. Okay? That's your corporate tax, 4.5%. So, again, these same people that are screaming, oh, you're picking my pocket. Well, who's picking whose pocket here, Glenn?
Now, see, if you use Jason Kenney math there, that says they have had a 20% reduction in their tax rate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
So there you go.
So, they can complete, because this was apparently a 32% increase in their payroll expenses. Well, we just gave you a 20% tax cut in your corporate expenses. We just reduced your taxes by 20% to use Jason Kenney math. So I mean,
there we go.
but who's spinning the narrative? Who's talking about the hue and cry? Conservative National Post, conservative Globe and Mail, conservative Sun Media. That's who's bringing up the hue and cry here. When you look at other service providers like the Tyee, for instance, in British Columbia, or other smaller community-driven publications in the province of Ontario, you're not hearing that story. You're hearing the benefits. You're hearing about the guy who pays his workers already $16 an hour. All right? You're hearing about the guy who doesn't roll back. But you don't hear about those people in the Globe and Mail or the Star or the Sun, rather, or the Financial Post, because, they, like Conrad Black, believe that this is a huge mistake. Well, the long and short of it is, when would it have been time?
Never, according to them.
No, it's going to. Well, exactly. Well, it's too much too fast. I mean, Patrick Brown is already talking about getting rid of 15. He's saying, okay, well, we're not going to roll the clock back, but we're not going to raise it to 15. He's already saying that. That's in his platform. He's talking about stopping the fire sale at Ontario Hydro. I asked his candidate a little more than a month ago, okay, so you want to stop the fire sale at Ontario Hydro? Will you at least acknowledge the fact that you guys started the fire sale? Will you? Are you telling me you're going to buy back Ontario Hydro, like Andrea Horwath has said? I mean, that is ludicrous. If you want to talk about debt, think about buying back. Because as I said to you before we went live to air, you can't put that genie back in the bottle, Glenn. It's out. You can't tell private businesses, you don't exist.
Well, that is the end goal of privatization, though, neoliberalism. It's too late, That's the goal.
Exactly. Yep.
Now, what you're saying about everybody screaming about we want lower taxes, et cetera, but yet the Wynne government has had a fair amount of capital put into socially based programs, and good on them, fair enough. But that affects the debt, and again another rallying point for those opposed to people-based programs. Now, there's a lot of numbers that are thrown out. $300 billion. Okay,
over the next 10 years.
Big number. Yeah, but what is the context of it? And is the debt really that bad? Because even at the $300 billion forecast, that's $21,600 for every resident. That's right. That's nowhere near the tripping point for common measurements for when debt is too much. It's not even close.
No, and let's face it. I mean, if you look at that as a percentage of debt to GDP, for instance, what are we talking about here? 18%?
Yeah, I'm looking. I know it's in this article I got in front of me. I just got to find it. Oh, there it is. Debt to GDP ratio of just under 40%. Now, for comparison, in Greece, their debt to GDP is 175%.
That's right.
So, yeah, the sky's not falling.
Is California on your list? One of the things I have to say is that Ontario has the largest subnational debt, is what they're saying, right? And again, now when they talk about debt, it's almost as though someone wrote a huge check and now we got to cash it. I mean, they're not talking about how we get this debt, as you said a moment ago. The other option is to raise taxes. Well, nobody wants to pay more taxes. But I've talked to Ontarians. I've talked to thousands of Ontarians in the last few years who've said to me, you know what, I'd gladly pay a 1% increase to cover those costs. I would gladly pay a 1.5% increase. I spoke to one of our former conservative members of our town council. Well, now, town councils are supposed to be nonpartisan, but this guy is a conservative, a longtime conservative member. And he was we were talking about the budget process. And he said, because I said, well, people were wondering, why can't you just cut property taxes by 1%? And he said to me, Dave, we could cut property taxes tomorrow. You want a 1% reduction? No problem. I can do that. But that's $750,000 we have to take out of the public coffers. Where do you want me to take that $750,000 from? Should I take it from Public Works? Should I take it from our legislative services? Should I take it from bylaw enforcement? Should I take it from the community center? Where do you want me to take that $750,000? I'll give you a 1% reduction, but where do you want me to take that money from? And that's the conversation federal and provincial governments need to have with constituents. We're more than happy to say we'll cut that. Well, I will give you that. If you want a 1% reduction in your corporate taxes, no problem. But that's how much it's going to cost us. So where do you want me to take that money from? I think when you start putting it in perspective like that for people, I mean, I still thank Bill McDonald every day for that because, again, I'm not a conservative, but at the same time, I still believe in pretty sound fiscal management, right? You really shouldn't spend more than you have. But if it's an emergency, you got to, right? I mean, we need hospitals. We need long-term care facilities in this province. We need homeless shelters, all right, as sad as that is. We need social housing in this province. We need transit and transportation. We need those things. Do we just say people, too bad, so sad, we can't afford it because it's going to cost this much in taxation? I think if we started putting it to people in realities, if we started saying to people, okay, it's going to cost us $300 billion over the next 10 years, that's what our debt's going to be, or we can add 1.5% on your bottom line. Well, I think if we did that, the financing would definitely work out, and we'd probably have that $300 billion paid off in record time. But again, that's the social contract I was talking about earlier. The government has to be willing to go to the people and say, okay, here we are. This is what you're telling us you want. This is what it's going to cost. This is what the tax rate will be. Is this something you want us to do? And I mean, until governments are willing to do that, I think we're going to constantly hear what we hear now, which is the usual chatter from conservatives who want tax cuts and from social lefties who want more services. I mean, the reality is the happy medium is we provide the services with the money we have. If we need to provide more services in the future, we either project a debt or we increase taxes. And I think we need to have that conversation. I think people need to be aware of what a tax cut costs. They need to be aware of, what services cost and how little it would cost everyone rather than kicking the debt down the road.
Okay, that all makes sense to me, but, it's just political risk is the simplest way I can sum up why nobody ever wants to talk about it.
When I spoke to Kathleen Wynne, because I talked to Kathleen Wynne about this, she said, you're right. She said the one thing we need to be as a government is more open with people. We need to explain how we got to where we got. And, subsequent to that conversation I had with her, we started hearing more explanations. Now, I'm not saying I'm the guy that motivated it, because she said she'd heard that from a number of people. But, I mean, it takes a number of people to say the same thing before a government goes, okay, you know what, that's logical. It actually makes sense. And maybe that's something we're going to incorporate. Because the next thing you know, they start to do these things. And the lefties are like, oh, they're stealing our ideas. But the reality is a good idea is a good idea.
No, that's true. Now, that makes me think, okay, we're going to have a throne speech and we're going to have a budget before the writ drops. Is this going to be a very, what's the way to put this, a common man-friendly election budget?
Well, I think the last budget was a common man-friendly election budget. I think what we're going to see is a continuation of that, and we're going to see them talking about how they're going to continue to roll out the programs they have started to roll out, and also to talk about the possibility of financing some of those rollouts a little earlier. Because don't forget, I mean, the job numbers are up. We've got the lowest unemployment rate we've had since the 70s. Ontario is a huge factor in the job creation numbers. We're seeing more people working, which means that there's more revenue coming to the provincial government, which means that $300 billion deficit could be trimmed. Who knows? But what I do know is that they've got a pretty solid agenda already. I mean, don't forget, they're bringing in OHIP Plus in the province of Ontario, which means that anyone who's 24 years and 364 days or younger will have their prescriptions covered.
Yep. Right?
So essentially a form of pharmacare. They're building 40,000 new daycare spaces, licensed daycare spaces. Okay, they've expanded on SK and JK for kids at public school. I mean, at this point, as they like to say, the economy's firing on all engines. They're saying that they got a province where a family with a sick kid doesn't have to dip into their savings to pay for that child's medication. That's a fact. On January 1st, many of the impacts from the previous budget came into effect. So what we had in the last budget wasn't a projection for down the road. It was for this is what's happening next year, and that's how they rolled it out. So we're going to see what happens. There's still some legislation, like I said. There's the introduction of Bill 170, which happened in October, which is the child abuse prevention awareness they want to talk about. They're also redistricting some of the riding boundaries. They've got a lot of economic investments in a rural Ontario. Because, again, Ontario's a mainly rural province, right? So things like agri-food business and the various development funds. So, I mean, they've got a lot of irons in the fire right now. The real issue becomes, will people get over the fact that they don't like Kathleen Wynne's sexuality and vote for the Liberals again?
This brings up another issue. I mean, as far as land goes, yes, Ontario is still very rural and rugged and almost impenetrable in some parts. But as far as the votes go, and as far as the number of seats go, we know what
which
part
are
of the province. Yeah, we know what part of the province gets the priority. So, as this pre-election circus in Queen's Park starts to wind up, what do you see the Progressive Conservatives and the NDP doing while they have the spotlight before the writ is dropped? What are they going to do? Are they going to attack the Liberals, or are they going to attack the Premier?
I think a lot of it will be attacking the Premier because she's got really low numbers. I mean, the Conservatives are already running around the province. I mean, she's still suing Patrick Brown for libel.
Yes.
She's still suing him for libel. I think before anything can happen, Andrea Horwath and the NDP have to come up with a platform, a plan. At this point, they don't appear to have one. The Conservatives' platforms, it looks very much similar to the Liberal platforms, so they're going to have to try to find a way to distance themselves from that. When it comes to corruption, the Conservatives right now are there's four, I could be wrong, but I believe there are 4 current investigations underway of the Conservative Party by the Ontario Provincial Police for some shenanigans at their nomination meetings, very much like the Kathleen Wynne situation in Sudbury, where the party decided that they wanted to have a certain person run, and that person got offended, and they got upset, or whatever else. And so there are a number of investigations going on right now in the province of Ontario. So the Conservatives got to get themselves out from under that. I mean, they run around the province painting Kathleen Wynne as quote-unquote corrupt. The very things they're accusing her of are the very things they're being investigated for right now. So, I mean, when it comes to the gas plant debacle, they love to talk about the gas plant, but it was 2 plants that were closed. All party leaders had said they were going to close those plants anyway, and nobody talks about the 26 plants that got built under the Liberal government. So,
would that be a direct issue of using the mantle of government to pin that on Kathleen Wynne personally, the gas plant decision?
Yeah.
Any premier would have done it.
Well, and the leaders of all parties said they were going to do it too. So, I mean, the long and short of it is the government of the day has to wear that debacle. It happens that the government of the day is the Liberal government. That's the reality there. As far as it being a scandal, you want to know what the scandal was with the gas plants? The scandal is they didn't build them where they were supposed to build them. That's the scandal. It's not that they canceled them because they canceled them because of NIMBYism. I mean, the one plant was being built in a very, very hoity-toity part of Mississauga. And those people didn't want to have a gas plant. And yet the very reason they were building that plant where they were building it was so that they didn't have to spend billions more on infrastructure to run lines to that neighborhood so that those people could have their laptops and PCs plugged in 24/7. So again, this comes down to that whole idea before of, well, I don't want to pay for that. Why should I have to pay for that? Well, you're using it, right? I mean, there is a certain class of people that don't think that they should have to pay for things like everyone else. There's a certain class of people that expect things. I mean, those plants can be built in poor neighborhoods, can't they? Those people won't object.
Exactly. Now, well, I mean, we've talked about what? Go ahead.
I honestly don't know what the opposition is going to have to offer. I mean, if they're going to trot out the same old tired, corrupt Liberal government, then of course the Liberals can counter that because, you know, the so-called corruption has been, for all intents and purposes, quashed. The only real thing they can come back on, if you will, is the gas plant situation because there's still 2 staffers from McGuinty's government who are on trial, but it looks like that trial is going to wrap up soon, and I don't think those people are going to be found guilty of anything. If they are found guilty of anything, it won't be anything seriously criminal. So again, there goes the whole corruption angle that the Conservatives have been hoping to ride away on. I mean, they're riding on 2 things: the fire sale of Ontario Hydro, which, let's face it, the Conservatives started the fire sale. They set fire to that. Let's face it, it wouldn't be a fire sale if the Conservatives hadn't burned the building down to begin with, right? That's the first point. The second thing is the corruption thing. So other than that, I mean, really, what is it people don't like about Kathleen Wynne? To be honest with you, I think it's what I said at the very beginning, the fact that she is a smart, outspoken, not particularly attractive gay woman in a province that, I mean, let's face it, Toronto the good, Ontario the good, right? I mean, Ontario has always been sort of a religious, if you will, conservative province. I mean, you know, it's Orange Ontario, right?
Well, that brings me
that's why the
to.
I was going to say that's why the Conservatives were in power. That's why they were in power for 47 years in this province, right? And that's why they were in power for 40 years in Alberta. Same thing, right? It's a very specific mentality, and it doesn't really necessarily have anything to do with conservatism, but really has more to do with an ideology. And let's face it, you know, government's responsibility is to be the largest not-for-profit around. That's the role of a government. And also they have to represent everyone. Sorry, they have to represent everyone.
Well, they are supposed to. Let's put it that way. But, okay, we've identified the most popular pin, not even on the Liberal government, but on the Premier, because, you know, it's her government apparently. This has affected the polling for, you know, quite a while. The last 18 months for sure. The polling has been, I almost have to wonder whether the polling pushes the media or the media pushes the polling. I think it's just a vicious circle. But even just a month ago now, at the beginning of December, the last round of polling came out, and we got 2 very different pictures. It depended who was doing the polling.
We sure did, yeah.
I mean, Forum Research, for a year and a half now, has had results that nobody else has, and it's always the same. It has the PCs with a sizable lead and the Liberals in third most of the time. They haven't changed at all. But Campaign Research and Innovative Research Group tell a much different story. I mean, in December, Campaign Research said PC 35, Liberal 32. You know, and even Innovative Research had a 10-point gap. But as we saw just recently, I think there's a picture in the slideshow, it's basically a dead heat now by what people are calling the most reliable polling. So if it hasn't worked to this point, will it work going forward? Or do you think that a logical, updated budget and no major screw-ups until the election writ is dropped? Do you think the Wynne Liberals are willing to just do the best job they can and try and get out the vote and see what happens?
I think you're right. I think if we do get I think we're going to get a spring budget. It's basically going to be a all hands on deck. We're going to use this budget to. I don't think we're going to see a lot of new goodies, if you will, rolled out. That's not the Wynne government. That's not what she's done. She's not typically someone who buys votes. I think what she's going to do is remind people of where we are, how we got to where we are, where we were, you know, and to remind people that, you know, I mean, the opposition for all the hue and cry from them, really, they don't have a whole lot to offer. They're not really offering anything different, you know, because the one thing that everyone's running on is this mantra of change. We need to change. We need to change. I mean, in a country that's given dynasties to parties in the past, I don't see that being the issue. We don't tend to vote for people in this province, though. We tend to vote people out, and I don't think right now we're going to see. I mean, a lot of people say, "Oh, Kathleen Wynne, I hate her," and I always say to them, "Well, what is it you hate about her?" I don't know. There's just something. Well, what is it? You know, I mean, are you not happy with what she did with schools? Oh no, my kid's school's got way more money than it used to have. Oh, okay. Is it about the hospital? Oh no, we got a great hospital. We got a great hospital in our riding right now. We got a few great hospitals in our riding, actually. Well, what is it? Their treatment of farmers? No. I think they've done a pretty good job with farmers. And some horse racing people might not be happy with what they did with the horse racing at the racetracks in the province. But I mean, that was a few years ago. Maybe those people still bear a grudge. I don't know. But what it really comes down to is, do you think you're going to be better off with the other two parties? It's not whether you're better off than you were 14 years ago, because damn, everyone is better off than they were 14 years ago. That's just a reality. Are you going to be better off with one of the alternatives? And at this point, I have to say, I don't know. And for me, it's the better the devil you know.
Well, I think just from being outside of Ontario, I mean, I spent probably almost 4 weeks in Ontario in different parts this year, over the summer and into early winter.
Mm-hmm.
That's more time than I've ever spent there before. And I just got
Right.
to look around and get a sense, and I was different places. I was in the GTA, then I was outside of it, west, going towards almost Sarnia, so it wasn't the same environment. And I didn't really sense a whole lot of people being pissed off everywhere because
I know
things are so wrong. I just didn't get that feeling. And I was thinking about it, and then I look at the headlines on the Toronto Sun, and of course it's something disparaging, and I look around and I think, well, I just really don't see it. So I know how intense the 24/7 news cycle is, especially in the GTA. It's ridiculous.
Well, you got.
But are they overdriving themselves? Are they already just pumping something that really isn't there? Do you think that's a possibility?
I definitely think that's a possibility. I think a lot of it is pumping something that isn't there. The one thing I hear over and over and over again from constituents out here and my listeners as well, thanks to our friend Ed, who calls me from Port Hope all the time. The one issue we hear about is waste. Just, what? I don't mind paying my taxes. Everyone says the same thing. I don't mind paying my taxes. I don't have a problem with paying what I pay. I get really good services, but I'm really tired of having to pay more, for instance, for driver's license. The fees went up again. And yet I see a lot of waste. I really, that for me, that's the big issue. That's what people tell me all the time anyway. For them, the big issue is government waste. And, I don't want to see it. I don't want to see the waste. I don't want to hear about more government waste. And I got to be honest with you, in the last 3-4 years, I guess since about a year after the last provincial election anyway, I have not heard anything about government waste. I haven't heard any new scandal about government waste. So I think to your point earlier, if the Wynne government can avoid being scandalized even further than they were apparently, there's a really good chance people are going to get into the voting booth and go, you know what? I mean, our guy's Lou Rinaldi. That's who my MPP is. People are going to get in their booth. They're going to go, you know what? I like Lou. I think Lou's doing a good job for us. You know what? I'm voting for Lou. I know voting for Lou is voting for Wynne, but I don't care. I'm going to vote for Lou. And I think north of us, people are going to vote for Jeff Leal, and think people are going to vote for the incumbents. I think we're going to see an election where a lot of incumbents get elected. I don't think we're going to see a lot of people defeated. I think what we're going to see, perhaps, if we do see any numbers go down, we may see some Conservatives lose seats. I think the Conservatives, for instance, in the couple of Toronto ridings that won recently, I think they're going to take a hit because of Patrick Brown. Because the problem with Brown, in my humble opinion, is he doesn't have anything to offer. And it's not that I'm worried. I'm concerned. I mean, with Harper, at first I was always, afraid of what this guy's going to do. But then when he got elected, I realized what he was going to do, and I just thought, we got to get rid of this guy. But with Mike Harris, the thing about Mike Harris that got him elected was that he was an unknown, right? He had been a member of the provincial government. He had been a minister for education, and then he left government for a while. and he was able to be on the outside, and he came back with this idea that we got to get back to the common sense approach to governance, and he convinced people that was the mantra. I don't think Patrick Brown's got that. I don't think Patrick Brown can say to the people of Ontario, well, corrupt this, corrupt that. That's not Kathleen Wynne, because he can't point to anything specific.
Well, I mean, I haven't seen a whole lot of Patrick Brown. The thing that really surprises me from polling that's done is despite them releasing their platform months ago now, despite them traveling around the province, it's still almost a 50% chance that a resident of Ontario will not be able to recognize him from his picture. So is this guy just another share?
That is a concern. I think that's a very valid concern. That we're not hearing what he's doing, and he's been playing it close to his chest for quite a while because he doesn't want people to be able to create a narrative around who he is. And I think anyone who's afraid of that, anyone in my opinion who's afraid of driving their own narrative, because I mean when he talks, he doesn't talk about himself. He talks about the corrupt Liberal government. He talks about the boondoggles, the word they like to use, the fire sale at Ontario Hydro. But he doesn't talk about what he's going to do. He doesn't talk about Patrick Brown. He doesn't talk about what Patrick Brown plans on. He talks about, and I liken that to an employee who comes to you with a problem with no solution. Right? I mean, when I was a supervisor and had people come to me with problems, I wanted to know what the solution was going to be. They come to me with a problem. Oh, I don't know what we're going to do about this. Okay, well, have you thought about what we can do? Like, do you have any suggestions? No, I don't know. It's not my job. Okay. Well, then, come back to me with a solution, and maybe we can do something about it. And that's something else I look at when I vote. I mean, am I looking at someone who's going to be bringing me solutions to problems, or am I looking for a guy who's running around pointing out problems? I mean, everyone can see the problem. It's the solutions that few people can see.
Okay. Now, yeah, I understand that, and that was kind of the vibe I got. Now, considering that, Andrea Horwath has no problem being recognized. In polling, she proves the most favorable of the party leaders right across the board. So she has recognition. But as you said, they have really no platform yet. But the other thing I'm curious about, and the other thing, what I was curious about is the loss of Jagmeet Singh. Is that a problem?
I don't think so. I don't think so. I don't think he was a particularly active opposition guy. I mean, to be honest with you, before he ran for the leadership, I never really knew who he was. So he wasn't making any waves at Queen's Park. Is he going to affect her ability? Is he going to affect her ability to win? I don't know. I don't think so. I mean, it's like losing a life vest on the Titanic. Do you miss the life vest, or are you more concerned with the ship sinking? I mean, I don't know. But as far as Andrea Horwath goes, her problem is in the last election, she tried to tack a little bit more right of center, very much like a Mulcair. But, I mean, realistically, people don't vote NDP because the NDP are going to balance the budget. People vote NDP because someone's got to speak up for the working man. And at this point, the Liberals are speaking up for the working man. So I don't know that the NDP have much of an opportunity. I'd like to see them as official opposition myself. I honestly don't believe the Conservatives have been doing a good job as official opposition. And I think it's time the NDP. But again, the other problem with Andrea Horwath, and it's a personality issue, is that she and Kathleen Wynne don't like each other. Like there's an actual personality thing there. All right, like they genuinely don't like each other as people. I don't know why. Who knows? Somebody got their nose out of joint over something some time ago. I don't know. But Andrea Horwath doesn't like so, and you can see that when she speaks to her at Queen's Park during question period and during committee hearings. You can see that there's a personal animus there. Now with Patrick Brown and Kathleen Wynne, there doesn't appear to be any personal animus. So I think personally that could hurt Andrea Horwath. The best thing Andrea Horwath can do is come up with a comprehensive plan that talks about the good things that the Liberals have done. That she likes to talk about how they stole her platform. Don't talk about how they stole her platform. Don't talk about the problem with politics, Glenn. People like to talk about the other party. Don't talk about the other party, right? Don't bring them up. Why do you keep reminding people of that person's name? When they get into the voting booth, the only person they're going to think of is that person. They're not going to think about you because you never talked about who you were, right? I mean, personally, and I know a lot of people who vote this way.
Yeah, but the reason they do it is because there's no risk involved with talking about how much the other guy sucks.
Well, the risk becomes people realizing the other guy doesn't suck. That's the risk.
Well, that's
people realize
true,
it. I mean,
but...
look at Jeremy Corbyn in the UK. I mean, nobody knew who Jeremy Corbyn was. He wasn't making public speeches. He wasn't very popular with the other MPs in his party. But once that writ was dropped, and I mean, everyone thought he was just the biggest wanker out there. But once the writ was dropped and he started speaking at stadiums like Bernie Sanders and having thousands of people come to see him speak, and having thousands of people realize that he wasn't a wanker, that he was actually someone that you could like. Well, once they started to get to know him, and he talked about himself. He didn't talk about Theresa May. He talked about Labour. He talked about what he and Labour were going to do for the people. And that's why Jeremy Corbyn resonates with voters. But that's the same reason why Jack Layton resonated with voters. It's the same reason why Trudeau resonates with voters. Right? Trudeau talks about his constituents. Kathleen Wynne talks about her constituents. She doesn't run around talking about, oh, I'm this, I'm that, I'm the greatest thing. She doesn't. She's always about the constituents, what she can do for the people. And she doesn't just focus on the middle class either. I mean, as you can see with this budget, she's focused on housing issues, poverty issues, low income. She's there for the struggling masses, right? And that's the reality. And if you are going to be a leader that's with the struggling masses, it doesn't matter what the polls say. What matters is what those people who vote say. And those are the people who vote. And they like her because they like her or don't like her because of what she says.
Okay, now I'll play devil's advocate. What about the people that say the only reason all these programs are being brought forward in 2017 is because 2018 is an election year? What about the people who say that?
Well, I'd say to those people, they haven't been paying attention. Because after the last election, Kathleen Wynne brought in when they brought in their first budget after the last election, they said they were doing this. This is exactly what they said they were going to be doing. They said by the end of our mandate, we will finally be able to, they said this, we will finally be able to expand social housing. We will finally be able to ensure that we have, by the end of our mandate, we will have provided funding for hospitals. We will have built more schools. We will have hired more nurses and doctors. By the end of our mandate, we will bring in $15 an hour minimum wage. We will do these things for the people, not because we want to, but because it's the right thing to do. This is what she was talking about after the last provincial election, Glenn. So it's not something that was being done because there's an election coming. Anyone who's paid attention knows, or anyone who's paid attention knew that this was coming. Right? I knew this was coming. All right? The business owners who say that they're suddenly blindsided by the lack of consultation, they knew this was coming. After the last election, she talked exactly about this. She even said, once we've got the budget balanced, or within a year of budget balance, which is where we are right now, this is what you're going to see from this provincial government. Well, and so what is she doing? She's fulfilling her election promises. So these aren't freebies. These aren't giveaways for the new election. This is actually her fulfilling her mandate. This is what she was elected to do. How can anyone fault that?
The media chooses an entirely different angle. They choose the angle of taking the side of the CFIB and CTF and everybody else, that everything is a betrayal and a surprise, and how dare she?
Well, and that's why I'm glad corporations can't vote, Glenn. Right there.
Yes.
All right. Because it's when you talk about the mainstream media, that's corporations. They've got an axe to grind. They're not happy with the fact that their local community models have all imploded. They're not, they didn't plan for the future. Now they're running around. They're asking the provincial governments and the federal governments for money to help keep their businesses afloat. I just think it's rich, especially a group like the CFIB, for instance. They say they represent taxpayers. There's 4 members of that organization. I think 4. No, 5. I think it's 5. You can't join the CFIB, all right? Or the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, rather. You can join the CFIB. I wasn't. But the Taxpayers Federation, come on. Who do they represent? Do they really represent taxpayers, or do they represent the usual corporate agenda? All right. I mean, I know that we are getting more value for our dollar. I know what it costs to visit a doctor. I know what it costs to go to a doctor in the States. It doesn't cost nearly that much here. So don't tell me we're not getting value for a dollar. Right? I know what it costs to ride in an ambulance. I mean, I used to complain because an ambulance ride cost me $75 once. I talked to one of my customers from Buffalo. He said it was almost $2,000.
Wow.
So don't tell me we're not getting value for dollar. I just don't believe it. My kid can still go to public school. Your kid can go to public school. Not only that, but in Ontario, we actually have 2 publicly funded school boards.
Yes.
Right? I mean, the separate school board is still funded by tax dollars, which, in my estimation, is ludicrous. I mean, so to counter that narrative, I just say it's not true. To quote Mike Harris, I don't agree with the premise of your statement. That was Mike Harris's favorite line when he didn't agree with your question. I don't agree with the premise of your statement. And I think the same could be said of the rest.
I do remember that. I do remember him saying that. Now, if they're going to play the angle about evil Kathleen Wynne, I think we have to look at demographics a bit, because I think there are definite patterns that can be exploited. Now, campaign research has been probably the most accurate out of the gaggle of pollsters out there. They did a poll right at the beginning of December, and they broke down the demographics pretty plainly. And the strongest supporters of the Progressive Conservatives are voters aged 55 to 64 and 65 plus. 65 plus, right. PCs hold 49% of those polled. So, I mean, right there. Now, I'm going to play devil's advocate again. Isn't there a natural tie-in to the aversion to the orientation and lifestyle of Premier Wynne with that voting demographic? Would you agree that there's a definite connection?
Yeah, generally there is, yep. Although people are, don't forget that demographic is now, we're talking about the hippies, right? Now we're talking about that 60s love child generation. That's whose generation we're talking about here now, right? In that particular demographic. So maybe 20 years ago, those people would have been repelled. But, the people who are 65 now, who were hippies, who were young, free love people from the 70s and who were there to watch all of this going on, they're not so averse, I don't think. So I think that demographic, in terms of that psychology, has shifted to a certain extent. Has it shifted greatly? No. I still think a lot of people won't vote for Kathleen Wynne because she's an openly gay woman. So, and that's that demographic you're talking about. The real issue is going to be whether we can get young people to the polls. That's the real issue. Whether we can get first-time voters to the polls. Whether we can get the so-called millennials to the polls. That's really going to be the challenge. Because those are the people who benefited the most from Kathleen Wynne, believe it or not. They're the ones who are going to be getting post-secondary education paid for by the province of Ontario. That's happening. Those are the people that are going to be getting their prescription drugs paid for if they're 24 or just under 25, right? So, that's the first-time voter generation for sure. If those people can be convinced that this government has served them well, then we'll see.
Well, that tends to go with the next thing I'm going to say from campaign research. The Ontario Liberal Party voter intent is strongest in the 18 to 24 demographic with 49%, 25 to 34, they also score 37%, which is tops in those two demographics. And the Liberal voter intent is strongest in Toronto, 41%. So those numbers, there's only potential for growth there. I don't mean to be fatalistic, but when you talk about the demographic of 65 plus compared to 18 to 24, it's pretty easy to see which is the growth industry and which one isn't.
Right.
So, is there going to be anything specific, do you think, from Wynne and the Liberals to encourage the youth vote, the first-time vote, or are they just going to use the policies that they've delivered?
Well, I think it's going to be a lot of reminding people about the policies they delivered, and plus the things that are now coming to play. Right. Again, the minimum wage increase just happened this year. It's going to 15 in the year after this. I mean, there are a lot of things that, as I say, happened at the end of their mandate that have really benefited that age group, and also has really benefited rural Ontario. I mean, I live in rural Ontario. I have seen the amount of money that they've provided. I've seen the stable funding. For instance, to use our hospital as an example, we have a hospital in our riding that was in my town, okay, that for all intents and purposes was never supposed to be built. The previous government didn't want to build it. Then they built it, and they said, okay, we'll build it, but we're not going to finance it. So they basically built this building with no intention of honoring their commitment. We have seen for 8 years our hospital struggled with budget. This year, and well, last year as well, because they've had the provincial auditors go in there and go through them. I mean, they've gone through them with a fine-tooth comb and said, yeah, you know what, you guys have cut everything. You're basically at bare bones. Obviously, you need more money. And so they got more money. This year, they were for last fiscal year, 2017, they were given an additional $2 million, and that's going to be permanent funding in the go forward, that additional $2 million. Plus, increases will come forth. All increases in the province of Ontario, just so the listeners know, will be going based upon inflation. So, again, I mean, that's a fair approach. I mean, really, I think what it's going to take is for the members who have been elected, like our Lou Rinaldi, for instance, who's basically been there since the beginning. He was out for one brief period just before the last election. He was just reelected. He's a strong riding representative. I think that's really what Kathleen Wynne's strength is going to be. It's going to be the representatives in her various ridings across the province, not just in Toronto. And I think the people in Toronto are going to struggle, to be frank with you, because, you know, I mean, Toronto has not had a really good go in the last few years, and a lot of that is laid at the doorstep of John Tory, who, refuses to spend money. But in the rest of the province, in my riding and in the three ridings directly around me, in Peterborough and in Durham and just east of us in Trenton, I mean, they have seen more money over the last 10 years than they saw in the previous 20. And that is the message that has to resonate across the province. That's what we have to tell. That's what the members of provincial parliament are going to have to do. So this campaign isn't going to be so much Kathleen Wynne focused, not in the ridings, as it is going to be focused on what the ridings have achieved. I mean, we got a riding, 3 ridings away in Whitby. That's a conservative riding that has seen millions of dollars go into that riding, whether it's the GO Transit or whether it's hospital services or whether it's improved roads. They built the 407 through that riding, expanded the 407. So the provincial government has really done a great job in that riding. That is Jim Flaherty's wife's riding, former Finance Minister Jim Flaherty. I'd like to see it happen. I don't know how close it could be, but there's a good chance that even she could lose her seat, Glenn.
Interesting.
Because, again, what they should be focusing on is what have they done? What have they done? What did they say they were going to do? How did we get to where we are? And what are we doing next? And they've got answers to those questions. The other two parties don't have answers to those questions. And then there's the fear that Patrick Brown's just going to cut taxes and cut services like the last Conservative government. So,
yeah. Well, the other thing,
I think
we've both acknowledged the importance of the millennial voter, of the first-time voter, of the long-term beneficiary of what the Wynne government has done, how important that voter is. But overall in Ontario, the last provincial election turnout that was over 70% was in 1971, the first time Bill Davis won. And in 2014, it was 51.3.
That's right.
So
although in my riding was almost 70% in my riding.
Well, that's correctly. Good to hear. But is this something that can be halted? Do people care enough?
Or repaired? Well, again, that's what it's going to come down to. I think that's the conversation. And that's why it's important that, for shows like yours and mine, for instance, that talk about the issues. It shows, the Toronto talk shows, All they do is beat up on the premier. They don't talk about the issues in the city. They don't talk about what's needed. They don't talk about the fact that the city of Toronto wants to spend 3 times as much to build one subway stop as they could do to build, 8 RT stops. Yeah. Right? I mean, I know how important the RT is to Edmonton. Imagine if the provincial government said, we're not going to build them. We're going to build one subway.
Yeah. Wouldn't go over too well.
Yeah. No, it wouldn't. And yet, for some reason, they're blaming the provincial government. The provincial government's dragging their feet. They won't give John Tory the money he needs. Well, John Tory wants to piss away a whole whack of money to build one subway stop. It's a vanity project. I mean, they had a Scarborough RT that had 4 stops. They've closed it. Those people don't have access to an RT anymore. They now got to take the bus south to the subway. And they say, those people in Scarborough should have access to a subway. See how much better it would be. Well, you should have refurbed the 4 stations you closed, and you should have built 4 more. That's what you should have done. But the amount of money they want to spend on one subway stop, I mean, they could build an RT line north and south of the 401 into Scarborough with the amount of money they're building one subway stop with. They literally could build RTs, but they don't want to do it because, the people of Scarborough don't want to feel like second-class citizens. Why should they be the only ones without a subway? Come on. They just want to get to work on time.
Well, I mean,
they don't care if there's subways underground. They don't care.
I've seen dysfunction in Toronto governance ever since the establishment of the GTA. But, Montreal's
absolutely.
gone through the same thing. Edmonton's going through it now. This never works.
Mm-hmm.
But, carry on. All right. Well, I mean...
Well, that's neoliberalism for you, right?
Yeah. Well, hopefully there can be enough people who give a shit, I suppose. And, I guess when you look at the big picture, at least for me, being so far away from Ontario, it's the tendency of the corporate media to make sure you know about every bad thing that happens.
Mm-hmm.
Without a doubt. It's the good things
That's
that
right.
you probably hardly ever hear about, especially nationally.
Mm-hmm. That's
I
right.
haven't heard too much bad coming out of Ontario. In fact, the last thing that was supposed to be bad, but actually wasn't, was the court case. Now, is there going to be any lingering angle that can be spun off the Ontario Liberal Party and being in the courts? Or is that spent? It's over?
Well, I think given that the Conservatives are currently under similar investigations, that's probably over. I mean, don't forget, what started the court case was this so-called idea that the provincial government or the provincial Liberals were offering incentives to people not to run. Well, right now in Ontario, we have, I believe, 4 riding associations where the entire riding association has quit because they had a nomination meeting, somebody won, the leader didn't like that person, those people were tossed under the bus, and someone else was put in their stead. Right? I think one of them was in that Niagara Cranbrook riding. I think it's Niagara Cran, where that young Oosterhoff guy. I think his name was Ooster, whatever his name is, the youngest member of provincial parliament now. Some 20-something guy won. Apparently,
yeah.
That's how he got the nomination. So, I mean, if they want to run around the province calling the kettle black, that's fine. But let's face it, the Liberals did exactly what was within the rules. Elections Ontario said the same thing. The courts have said the same thing. The Tories are running their nominations pretty much exactly the same way. So, I mean, I can't see them even bringing it up other than the fact that Kathleen Wynne suing them or suing Patrick Brown personally for libel. No, that would be interesting if that was brought up at a all candidates meeting. I would love to see that question. What about the corruption of Kathleen Wynne? Oh, yes. Well, what about the fact that your leader libeled the Premier of Ontario and still won't apologize? What about that? Right? Because he said she was on trial.
Okay.
I mean, Patrick Brown,
now
he said that.
So now
she was never on trial.
Does this give Andrea Horwath ammunition to hit them both with this?
It could. She could definitely. But again, I mean, nomination processes are pretty difficult. I guess the benefit for the NDP is that in a lot of rural ridings, they've had the same person run in every election. Like in my rural riding, okay? I think in the last in the last two, we had the same woman, and then for the six before that, and literally six before that, I think we had one other person. So we've had basically the same person run for the NDP in the last several decades or several elections, and it's because they don't have the membership out here. They don't have people wanting to run. So I think for them, it could actually be a benefit. They could probably use those things. At least with the NDP, if you get a nomination, you're going to be the one who's nominated. You don't have to worry about the leader coming in and saying, you're out of here. And for the most part, that's the case. But then you have to look at who they're running. I mean, are they running people who just want to be also ran so that they can say they got an NDP candidate on the ballot? Are they running people that can actually win? And again, that was one of the reasons I left the NDP when I did, was because they weren't running candidates who actually wanted to win. They were running candidates who wanted to be the NDP candidate on the ballot because they needed a candidate. I mean, if you're not running to win, then why run at all? And it's an election. People have said to me, I said this to Jack Layton when I stopped voting NDP. I said the reason I'm not voting NDP is because Jack Layton doesn't want to be the prime minister, right? Because he wanted to be the leader of the opposition. That's what he was running for. Well, I hate to break it to you, but you can't run for the leader of the opposition. That's the default position. That's what happens if you came second best. You have to actually want to win the big chair in order to come in second, right? And I said that to our NDP representative because I said that. Well, first I said it to Jack. He goes, "Well, I'm realistic." I said, "Jack, this is an election, man. Like anything can happen in an election." Well, I want to be realistic. Okay, well, realistically, you're not getting my vote.
Well, I would ask, it's too late, but I would question Mr. Layton's logic there looking at a case like Rachel Notley.
Mm-hmm.
Who ran to win.
She ran to win.
Day one.
And guess what? She won. Exactly. And, and in Jack Layton's last election, I got to give it to him, in the very last election, the one, he and God rest his soul, died shortly thereafter. But he actually ran in that election to win. You could tell he wanted to be the prime minister in that election. But that was the only one. Yep. Ed Broadbent, when Ed Broadbent was running I joined the NDP when Ed was the leader because Ed Broadbent wanted to be the prime minister of Canada. And I actually believed he did. And that's why I voted for him. But once the leader of your party doesn't really want the job.
Well, I think everybody in Canada believed that Ed Broadbent actually did want to be the prime minister. No doubt about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
But I take a look
they didn't give him the job.
I take a look at some of the early campaigning done in the middle of December, and at that point in time, Andrea Horwath was saying exactly what you've said has been going on. I mean, I hear it everywhere I go. There's a real sense of disappointment with Kathleen Wynne and the Liberals.
Mm-hmm.
Folks are saying that they've pretty much had enough of what's happening in the province. They're looking for what's next. But as you said, It's about Wynne is the problem. What's next? We don't know.
Exactly.
So
it's the same reason Hillary Clinton lost.
Yeah, like where is
why
this
do you think? Hillary Clinton lost for the same reason, right?
Yeah, and the claim that everything the Liberals are doing are NDP ideas, and then the exact attack on Patrick Brown about how can people have confidence in him with the criminal fraud and forgery probe by Hamilton Police, and everybody's going exactly to plan to this point. Is everybody just going to stay on the same page until the throne speech, and then we see what's really going on?
I think at this point, everyone's sort of in hover mode because they're waiting to see, is she going to unleash an election budget? That's the other question, right? Is she going to unleash an election budget, or is she going to unleash a budget that carries on from what she's been doing? In my estimation, I think we're going to see a carry-on budget. We're not going to see a budget with a lot of big spending and ambition because they know, the worst thing they can do is go into an election with all these promises. I mean, how many promises did the Liberals make? 172 or 175 or something? Or actually, no, I think it was in the 400s. So far, they've broken 100 and something of them. So, I mean, a lot of people are getting dissatisfied, if you will, with the current PM. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that they painted such an incredible vision, and they haven't been able to bring it off. But let's look at why they haven't been able to bring it off, right? I mean,
that's the Obama effect.
Mm-hmm. Well, a lot of why they haven't been able to bring off with. I mean, what was the report I read in December that they've only brought in half as much legislation as the Tories had done in the same amount of time in their first mandate. Where was the Tory opposition? And for that matter, what did the Tories care about opposition? They brought in omnibus legislation. They closed down debate. They shut down the democratic process. And if you didn't like it, they prorogued Parliament. So, I mean, if that's what Canadians want, I'm sure the Liberals can oblige them. But the Liberals promised change.
The other issue I have with that usually shuts people up is how many of those pieces of legislation ended up being declared unconstitutional compared to what the Liberals have done. And it's a zero on
more than any government in Canadian history. That's something Conservatives can enjoy. They've got so many records that they can enjoy. Jason Kenney and his Conservatives can enjoy the fact that they had more legislation overturned by the Supreme Court than any government beforehand. They are the only government that's ever been found in contempt of Parliament, not once but twice. They had a Prime Minister who refused to answer questions to such a degree that he prorogued Parliament and called an election. I mean, a guy who painted the opposition as traitors. When they wanted to form a coalition government, that's traitorous. That's not what the people voted for. You know what? It is what the people voted for. Those are the numbers. I mean, let's face it. You got a minority government, buddy. If you can't hold it together, the opposition, if they can band themselves together, can do that. Oh, well, look at that. They're getting in bed with the Bloc. So did the Conservatives a year before.
That's right.
Right? I mean, the reality.
Details.
So, but again, people don't remember it. That's what I call opposition amnesia. Oh, your government did that. Oh, well, really? When did we do it? Yeah. I mean, say what you will about the current government, and I mean, let's face it, it's not the best federal government we've ever had, but it sure is far cry from the worst, and we know that because the worst we've ever had was the one we just had. So, I mean, that's what it's just rich to be. You got like Peter Kent today talking about ethics. I mean, really, Peter Kent talking about ethics? Really?
Well,
Jason Kenney talking about Trudeau repatriate. Remember when Jason Kenney was campaigning? He was talking about how Trudeau is bringing home ISIS fighters and how that's it should be illegal and those people should be having their. And yet they don't talk about the 60 that came home on his watch.
Well, no, that's inconvenient.
Because he was the minister responsible. Oh, no, they don't talk about that. Again, this is why I tell people, be the elephant in the room, Glenn. Don't forget. Elephants don't forget for a reason. Democracy is the long game. Democracy isn't something that happens every 4 years. Democracy is the long game. That's why I call my show Canada's Holistic Political Chat. Because the reality, as you know, it's all interconnected, man. What happens in Edmonton will affect what happens in Toronto.
A week before Christmas, Premier Wynne made, I guess, a little statement. And if people judge it for what she said and what can be proven, it sounds to me like this government is not out of the game come June. Now, what the Premier said was...
that her talking about...
Well, I'll just read what I've got here. And this is from a Canadian Press article on December 19th. Once there are set election dates in place, then everyone knows when the election's going to be, which is the point. But it means that there's more strategic positioning that goes on earlier, I would say. Definitely as we go through the next session, when the legislature comes back in February, it will definitely heat up. Creating fairness is what I think government exists to do. It's always been at the heart of what I believe about elected office. Opportunity, when we think about growth, and we think about how the economy needs to flourish in Ontario and in Canada, That's about creating opportunity. I think it's only fair to people in the province that they have a sense of what we all stand for. These next few weeks and months are going to be about, yes, making those contrasts, but most importantly, stating emphatically and reinforcing emphatically who we are and what we believe in. Now that right there, that is the one thing that we have not seen from the PCs or the NDP as a party.
That's right.
We haven't seen that.
That's right. Well, she also said on the same day that whether or not they like me is beside the point. It's not about popularity. It's about making sure that we have the supports in place that people need. Because at the end of the day, if people have those supports, then they will make their decision about who they're going to vote for based on those supports. And I think she's right. I think she's absolutely right. And this goes to the point I was talking about before, about how they had a plan, they implemented the plan, and now they're living with the plan, and what do we do moving forward? All of those things have been talked about. All of those things have been put out. She said the point about being in government from her is about perspective. I think it's true.
Now, do you see any big turnover in the Liberal caucus? People running for re-election? Are they going to need many replacements? Does anybody really know that stuff yet?
Yeah, well, there's a few that aren't. Brad Duguid's not running. He's the Minister for Economic Development. He's not running again. I know I think there's 4 or 5. A couple in Scarborough, for instance. That's where Brad Duguid is. A couple in Toronto. Some older good folks that have decided they're not going to run again. Now, I don't know if they're not running because they don't think they're going to get elected, or if they're not running because they think their time is done. But as far as Brad Duguid is concerned, I don't know why he's not running. I think I'm going to posit the notion that he's not running because I think he thinks he could be the next leader, and he doesn't want to be caught up if Wynne's government loses. He wants to be able to sit out a session, and that way he can run for the leadership if they're indeed, because some people are already talking about the possibility of there being a leadership review after the provincial election. So again, that's the other point that people aren't thinking about. This could be really about Kathleen Wynne's political life, right? You know, if she doesn't win, if she says she'll stick it out, if she doesn't win, she'll stay on as the leader. But will they keep her as the leader?
Well, that's exactly what Christy Clark said, too, and she was completely to office within 2 weeks.
Yeah, well, Stephen Harper said the same thing.
Exactly.
So, I mean,
do you think they're going to need...
The reality...
Do you think they're going to need any star power candidates, or they have people?
I think they've probably got people. I don't think they're definitely looking for star power candidates. I think they're looking for candidates that can sell their message, that can sell the message of what they've done, what they plan to do, and where they think we're going to be. That's what they need. I think that's what every party needs, though. But as she says, I mean, the reality is it's not really about popular. It's not whether or not you like her. It's whether or not you like what they've done for you. It's like I said, I'm not a Kathleen Wynne voter per se, but I like Lou Rinaldi. He's our MPP. People in Peterborough maybe not necessarily happy with Wynne, but they like what Jeff Leal's doing, right? And I think that's really what it's going to do, because really she's created a government that isn't as much as the NDP and the Conservative opposition like to call it the Wynne government. She's created a government that's not all about Kathleen Wynne, right? Also, I think it's Deb Matthews. Deb Matthews has decided she's not running again either. The former health minister.
Nice.
She's been a stalwart for Wynne. So.
Okay. Now, to look at the Progressive Conservatives, November, they released their platform, The People's Guarantee. Nice title.
That's right.
It seems much more left than people were expecting, to present a more moderate, a more modern, a centrist party is the picture they're trying to paint. They're willing to invest in transit, right?
Yeah, because he's heard the mantra. I mean, this is what I said to you earlier when I was a kid. I grew up in Bill Davis's Ontario, right? And I even said this. If we had a Bill Davis-style leader at the Progressive Conservative Party, I might consider voting for them. So what I think has happened is the Conservatives have heard this across the province, right? They want a progressive Conservative government. They want a government that's going to be like the Davis government was. They don't want a common sense revolution government, slash and burn tax cut government. They want a government like Kathleen Wynne's Liberal government, That's what they want, what they already have. So I think part of Wynne's goal is going to have to be reminding people that if that's what you want, that's what we got. As far as Patrick Brown is concerned, he's running around. I mean, a lot of Conservatives I know locally in the riding were not happy with that announcement, that so-called People's Guarantee. They were not happy. If they want, I had one guy even said to me, if I wanted to vote for this, I'd vote for the Liberals. So, I mean, for Kathleen Wynne, this is actually a bit of a bonus.
Okay, because I have read reports that the membership in the PCPO dropped to as low as 12,000 after the last election, and now they're claiming to be over 200,000. So that should benefit them for their ground game and their campaigning. But what other surveys are showing is, despite the People's Guarantee being out since November, it basically hasn't moved the needle at all.
Well, and I have to wonder how many of the so-called 200,000 are members of, because there's an organization in Toronto right now, or in Ontario rather, to get rid of Kathleen Wynne. It's called the People's something or other. I can't remember. They've got a Facebook group of over 200,000 people, and they're working very hard to get rid of Kathleen Wynne. You know, but again, something else that Kathleen Wynne has. I mean, don't forget, something else the provincial Liberals did was they brought in per vote subsidies. Right, so they also changed campaign financing rules in this province. They also recently changed advertising rules, right? How much people can spend on advertising, especially partisan advertising. So groups like the, Ontario's Working Families, for instance, which is a group, I guess, started by some union members or whatever. Those people can campaign all they want up until the writs dropped. But once the writs dropped, they're not allowed to.
Okay.
They're not. So, and we're going to see that with these other groups too, the so-called Ontario People's Coalition that wants to get rid of the Liberal government, and these other organizations that are basically just conservatives, in my estimation anyway, conservative shill organizations that are espousing the Patrick Brown viewpoint and then the desire to get rid of Kathleen Wynne. I mean, let's face it, Ontarians have been, these people who have been dissatisfied with Kathleen Wynne have been dissatisfied with Kathleen Wynne since she won the election. So you can't tell me it has anything to do with Kathleen Wynne, other than the fact that she's a woman who happens to be married and gay. I mean, honestly, and I'm gonna hammer back on this too, because I think realistically, that's the only thing people have against Kathleen Wynne. I really, really believe that, Glenn. Because I've talked to people. Even today, I was talking to one of our local mayors, and I said to him, what is it about? He goes, I'll tell you. He goes, I've talked to her. She's one of the smartest people I've ever met. She listens to you. She's not one of these people that talks over you. She listens to what you have to say. You can tell she's listening. You can tell she responds with questions as though she's been listening. She's very, very personable, he said. She's very intelligent, very sharp. She listens well. He said, honestly though, I don't know what it is about her, but people don't like her. And I said, well, could it possibly be because she's, not very attractive? I'm going to say it. And I hate to say it. I've been saying it a lot lately too, and I think people are getting mad at me. But I mean, the truth hurts. She's openly gay. She's in a lesbian relationship. She's been married for a number of years to her partner. So again, that just flies in the face of the so-called conventions of who should be a leader of a government. Can you trust a lesbian to sit down with Republicans from Minnesota? Yeah, apparently you can.
Okay, so then that leaves what everybody in polling, media, everything, and the numbers prove it, one leader with the highest ratings just about across the board on anything relating to the leader themselves is Andrea Horwath. And I've seen her speak live. She is a good speech deliverer. She's very well spoken. She has the image issue handled. She's a package. Does it matter with her leading the NDP? Is she destined for third place again?
Well, I'd like to see her in the opposition. I think she'd be a really good opposition leader. But to be honest with you, I don't think the NDP would be a bad government party either. But again, they're in the position now because they've been in the wilderness so long that they're running candidates that are just also rants, right? Yeah. And I mean, this was Bob Ray's problem. I mean, as much as Bob Ray could have been a good premier, he didn't have He didn't have the people behind him. He didn't have a strong bench. He was running with a junior varsity team, and they were playing in the majors. You can't have a junior varsity team skate against the Toronto Maple Leafs. You just can't, right? And I mean, that was the biggest problem with Bob Rae's government. And that and the fact that they were left with economic time bombs like you wouldn't believe. I mean, David Peterson's government left a lot of messes behind, a lot. And I like to think that the current government has learned a lot of lessons from that. I mean, don't forget the crap that was left behind by McGuinty that this government has had to clean up as well, right? So, but, to her credit, she's managed to clean it up. She's managed to be transparent about how she cleans it up. She's taken a lot of hits as a result of it, but she's still, in my humble estimation, and as I say, I'm not voting Kathleen Wynne. I'll be voting for Lou Rinaldi, my member of provincial parliament, to re-elect him. But by the same token, when the rubber hits the road, I think she's done a good job. I think she's correct, though. The ballot question will be uncertainty. That will be the ballot question. That's what she told Alan Carter at the Queen's Park bureau chief for Global TV when he interviewed her on December 19th. Same thing. She said, well, it didn't seem possible 12 months ago. 2017 turned out to be a good year. But will it be a good enough year to make 2018 to make her the Ontario Premier? Right? I mean, let's face it, what are the Conservatives hammering away at? Hydro. Well, she just reduced hydro rates across the board by 25%. Yeah, but she kicked the debt down the road. So what? Every government since 1973 has kicked the hydro debt down the road. All right? I mean, if you want to be upset about debt, then you can complain to your grandparents about the debt they left behind. So that's that. She brought in pharmacare. She's expanding daycare spaces. I mean, two things that Ontario NDP wanted to do. Two things that progressive Conservatives are talking about doing as well now. Okay? I mean, really, if you're going to look at platforms, really the one to be judged by will be the Liberal platform. So you'll have to take the PC platform and the NDP platform and hold them up beside what the current government platform is going to be. And if you think you're going to be better off with one or the other, then that's where you'll place your vote. But if you believe wholeheartedly that we're essentially on the right track, then why switch trains? So that's my position on it. So as I say, as far as time goes and longevity, I mean, both Alberta and Ontario know that there's no limitation on a government. Alberta, you guys had the Conservatives, was it 40 years? 44. We had them for 47 years here in the province of Ontario, since the 1930s. So
okay.
I mean,
okay. This thing about
and I can guarantee you.
This thing about platforms, okay, you said that Wynne reduced hydro rates, and yet in the People's Guarantee, Brown says, he's going to go 11% further. So is this an opportunity for people to say, okay, well, what Wynne's doing, yeah, okay, I get that. It's still going to cost us money later on. But now Brown wants to add more. How far can they outpromise before they look stupid?
Well, I'll tell you right now, I don't think Kathleen Wynne's going to counter his promise because he's promising it, but he's got no way to pay for it.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like, how long before they overdo it?
Well, I think they have overdone it. That's Patrick Brown's not going to be able to do that. Not if he wants to stop the fire sale at the same time.
Okay.
Right. I mean, they're going to have to come up with the money somewhere. Does that mean they're going to sell the other half of the 407 that we just finished building? Because I mean that's the other option, right? So look what the Conservatives are doing in England. Look what the Conservatives are doing in the U.S. They're selling public lands. They're selling vast swaths of public lands. In the U.S., they're selling public lands for people to do resource development, whether it's mining, drilling, whatever. In the U.K., they're selling public spaces. They just decided in their last budget, or the budget before the last general in the UK, that they're going to start selling off public spaces. Well, that includes all those old manor homes that were left to the National Trust. I mean, that's a great windfall for people who don't want to pay their taxes, right? I mean, if you got corporations that don't want to pay their taxes, I mean, England has got it bad when it comes to people not paying their taxes. I mean, we got it bad too, but look at what they got going on over there. It's ridiculous. A Starbucks operating in the UK for 18 years and not paying a dime in corporate taxes. Come on. No wonder you don't have the money to cover things like, public housing. No wonder you have things happen like the Grenfell fire, right?
Okay.
So they'll just sell off those.
That brings up something else then that I just thought of. How have the revenues looked for the Wynne government? Has there been a big drop, or are they doing okay with the way things are?
Well, I think what we've seen, of course, is we've seen increases in things like driver's license renewals. We've seen the price of that go up. Your license plate renewal sticker price has gone up. So, I mean, what they've done, rather than raise taxes to cover revenue, because they haven't reduced the PST either, right? They're not going to do that. But what they have done is found inventive ways, if you will, to charge additional user fees. And that is something that pisses people off. But by the same token, I mean, we can always just raise your taxes.
Yeah.
And again, it only hits people who use the service. So not every Ontarian. Like I don't have a driver's license. Okay, I don't drive. I never have. I grew up in the city of Toronto. I'm 51 now. I'll be 52 this year actually, and I've never driven. I've never had a driver's license. No, I have driven. I had a couple of learner's permits here and there throughout life, but because of graduated licensing, I never got a license.
Yeah.
So when they raise fees on licenses or the sticker for your driver's license plate, I don't have to worry about that. That's not a fee that I have to pay for. So again, that's the kind of thing we're seeing when it comes to user fees, right? We're also seeing people have to pay for more things from hospital. Like you can get a cast, which is just a plaster cast, or you can get one of the nicer casts, but that's going to cost you money.
Interesting.
Things like physiotherapy. While you're in hospital, you get physiotherapy. But when you're done, you got to pay for physio now. Now, they've talked about bringing that back into OHIP, but at this point, they haven't done it. So maybe that's something they'll talk about in the upcoming throne speech. Maybe they'll talk about how they're going to bring that back into OHIP. But given the fact that they're providing health care, pharmacare for people under 24, or 25 rather, I don't think they're going to be bringing that back.
Well, I mean, I think we'll both agree that is the advantage of government. If there's any last-minute sweeteners like that, that's the government's prerogative to deliver them. But It's been fun to do a show again with you, Dave. Thank you very much.
Well, I've had a great time. I know I monopolized the speaking, unfortunately, but unfortunately, anyone who's listened to my show knows that's what I do.
No. I mean, that's how the View Up Here works. Guests come on to get across what they want to get across. And I thank you for that. And as you are the kickoff to what will surely be an Ontario election series on the View Up Here, you're welcome back anytime, sir. I'm sure things will develop, especially once the writ gets dropped.
Oh, yeah. Well, now I think once the budget, I think you and I should probably talk once the budget gets handed down, as we lead up into the election, and then once the writ drops, we'll talk a little bit about that. I think polls to watch. I think Keto Maggie at Main Street Research. I think he's run some pretty interesting polls. I think he's the only one who called the Calgary election, isn't he? It wasn't Main Street the only one that predicted Rachel Notley was going to be the winner in Alberta as well?
No, Main Street is actually the one. Main Street is the one that got Nenshie's numbers so wrong in Calgary. Keto is the one who paid the price. Yeah, it's actually, I think, campaign research has been pretty spot on so far in Ontario.
Right. Well, I mean, obviously those are some polls to watch for sure. But in the meantime, I think a lot of what we're going to see is people either trying to re-educate or people trying to de-educate. I think that's what we're going to see from the opposition. As far as the government is concerned, I think we're going to see a lot of them maintaining what they've done, and reminding people of where we are. We have the lowest wait times in the country in terms of hospitalization. We have the fewest number of people in the hallways in terms of hallway patients. But we're still seeing more people at homeless shelters. We're still seeing more people requiring social housing. We've got mental health crisis in this province. So, I mean, these are things that need to be addressed. And I think those are things that should be discussed at the election. I don't think we should be talking about this "what have you done for me lately" stuff.
makes sense, but I wish we had a media cycle that was longer than 15 minutes, and then maybe people could think longer term. But we'll see what happens.
That's what makes your show and my show so great. We talk to people for a long time. We don't do 10-minute sound bites. Even when I had the premier on my show, we spoke for nearly 40 minutes. You know, and she committed she's going to come by the studio. So I will let you know when she's coming as well, so that you can listen and your listeners can listen as well. And because all my shows are available online, by the way, www.northumberland897.ca. You can check out some of the podcasts as well. Or you can listen live at northumberland897.ca as well. You could, if you've got the TuneIn app, you can listen to it. So my show's available every day for those of you that want to listen to it. Glenn, you're always welcome to call my show as well.
Well, I thank you very much for getting your own plug in there, sir. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. Thanks, Dave. Have a good night. All righty.
Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye. All righty. We just went over the 2 hours. Thank you very much to Dave Glover. And that's it for this week. I got nothing else to say. We'll see you next week on The View Up Here. Good night.